Well, let's continue with the approach of the study of the institution that did not consolidate it, part number 4. And let's advance in it to arrive to the point where we have gathered a lot of information to understand what is the core of the issue, because it is fundamental that we can standardize criteria and we can understand each other. Now then, even though the Word of God is clear and decisive about the only place that God authorized for the construction of His temple, what history teaches us is that both the Paulins and the Pedrists decided to create their own temples, in open contradiction and blasphemy to God, to such a point that today they dispute in a pagan and blasphemous way who possesses the best pagan temples, and that according to them are for the honor and glory of God, and have arrived to the extreme of building for themselves great buildings and exotic temples, luxurious scenarios and opulent places of, between quotation marks, worship, in full observance of the ancient pagan customs. But the saddest and grievous thing is that they make the people that follow them to believe that God orders the construction, maintenance, and expansion of those pagan temples that are the mere adoration to the pagan god Mammon, the god of money. So imagine what an extraordinary and how a difficult thing this is. We have discussed with much determination and a lot of clarity this issue of the temple and the between quotation marks temples built by the religious groups and by their leaders in impairment of the people's economy, in an open abuse of authority, in a blatant and abusive violation of the laws of God. And we return to the same problem that we keep discussing repeatedly, and is, what is the will of God? You hear all the pagan religious leaders that the first thing they say is that you have to build a temple to please God. Others more savages and abusive, and saying that God revealed unto them that they have to build a temple. And well, we can keep referring to an amount of people that have invented a series of events to oblige their congregation or the members of their religious groups to make money contributions to build those abusive buildings that they call the house of God. We have made very clear that God has only asked for a temple, and that there is a history, a long history that should be told. But the majority of people nowadays of these religious groups boast that they have the best temples, and some barbarians have even turned them into discotheques, a terrible thing. Obviously, we will not enter in an open and profound discussion about this subject, because it is not the idea of the study, it is not the core of the issue, but we cannot abstract from reality that all of those that do not know the truth but preach it between quotation marks and committing heresies and blasphemies because they dedicate all their lives to this issue of the constructions of temples. So imagine yourselves that people today no longer realize nor reflect in this issue of the buildings, of these constructions, because the Paulins, for example, preach that people do not have to forsake to assemble together, as the mother of some, it says there. Those who have studied the history of the Church of God since its beginning until the current times, will realize that the first believers, like many nowadays, do not gather in temples, are not interested in gathering in temples, do not want to know about temples, do not want to know nor experiment with religious groups, because for them the will of God is the most important thing. But for the immense majority of the lost and astray, the will of God is what they care less about. So imagine that people are dying to be part of a religious group because they consider that in there they save their soul, that they are fulfilling God's will, a will that they have never investigated, that they have never cared about it, but they feel happy and joyful, satisfied, because they have fulfilled to belong to a religious group, to which they assist regularly or irregularly, but they belong to a religious group. But they have never stopped to think if that is the will of God, and if that is the temple of God, and if it is not, what are they doing there? And if it is not, why will they contribute to the construction of something that is pagan and that God doesn't agree with? So imagine this predicament, the conflict, the contradiction that is generated with relation to such a delicate subject. And it is not what the Church of God says. It is not what we say. It is not what others say. No. It is what is taught and spoken by God and Jesus the Messiah. Because everybody understands that the words of Jesus, the words of the Messiah, or within the words or the preaching or the message, or within His will or the will of God, it is that they have to build temples. Then that takes us to make a series of valid questionings regarding this supposed will, that it is not manifested, nor written, nor expressed in no part of the Scriptures, only in the Paulines and Pedrists. So we have to arrive to a logical conclusion. If God did not order the construction of temples, if the Messiah didn't ask for temples, why do human beings build temples? Why do they build those big buildings and spend those great resources to build those monstrous and scandalous edifications? These are valid and important questions. So here we have a serious and difficult problem, because we find ourselves with a dilemma. And that dilemma has to do if I have to keep assisting to a pagan temple. Because even though they can say to me that it is religious, and that it is the house of God, and that it is the will of God, and that God showed it to me in a vision, that it was a prophecy, barbarians, is an extraordinary thing. But to me, what matters is to know what do I have to do. Not what the pastor, the preacher, the apostle, the prophet X, Y, Z tells, but what do I have to do according to what it is being revealed to me. So question yourself and ask yourself if that so-called house of God is truly that, or what it is hidden there is a den of thieves. Because if Jesus the Messiah didn't have consideration to say to Herod's temple, as it was known back then, a den of thieves, and that temple, God had said precisely that it had to be built for Him. Moreover, He gave the specifications, so He had no consideration to say, sirs, that is a den of thieves. You have already corrupted this place. With more reason you won't come to us and say that these religious groups do not have also a den of thieves, because that is the denunciation of Jesus the Messiah. And we understand that those that are followers of Jesus the Messiah have the obligation of obeying His commandments and His words His will, and above all, the will of God. So we live in the environment to be closing this delivery. If those temples that exist nowadays of the Paulins, the Petris, and any other are the will of God and are the house of God or a den of thieves, that answer you will have to find it, and with what you find, take the decisions that regarding that matter have to be given. So our intention is to make you look something, and that you decide. We cannot decide for you. To conclude, we would like to take this space of the radio to invite you to visit the web page of the church. That is why we will proceed to give the address so that you can write to us. The address is churchofgod.tk. There you can find a series of information, messages, studies, and you can ask for a lesson by email. You can also visit the web page in Facebook. Also, we invite you to write to us to the last church 7 number, okay, gmail.com, and you can raise your questions, your concerns, your doubts. Thank you very much.